The ice broke beneath her feet with a sound like splitting bone, and Zachariah Norton watched from the ridgeline as the woman plunged through the frozen surface of the Animas River into the black water below. He kicked his horse into motion before his mind fully registered what he had seen. The big bay gelding surging forward through the snowdrifts that lined the mountainside. March in the Colorado high country was unforgiving, and the woman who had just fallen through the ice would have minutes at most before the cold stole her breath permanently. Zachariah urged the horse faster, his thick wool coat whipping behind him as he descended the steep slope toward the river. His shoulder-length dark hair, tied back with a leather cord, came loose in the wind, and his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The river was 50 yards wide at this point, the ice thick enough in most places to support a man's weight. But there were always weak spots where the current ran faster beneath. Zachariah could see the dark hole where she had gone through. And as he reached the bank, he spotted her pale hands grasping desperately at the edge of the ice. The current was trying to pull her under, and her movements were already becoming sluggish. He left the horse on solid ground and moved onto the ice with careful steps, testing each footfall before committing his full weight. At 6 feet 3 inches and 230 pounds of hard muscle, he was no light burden for the frozen surface. The woman's fingers slipped as he watched, and her head disappeared beneath the water. Zachariah dropped to his stomach to distribute his weight more evenly and crawled the last 20 feet. The ice groaned beneath him, but held. He reached the hole just as the woman's head broke the surface again, her mouth open in a silent gasp. Her lips were already blue, her face white as the snow on the banks. "Grab my hand," he commanded, extending his arm over the broken edge. Her eyes found his, wide and terrified and startlingly green, even in her distress. She reached for him, but her movements were uncoordinated, her fingers barely brushing his before the current pulled at her again. Zachariah shifted forward, ignoring the warning crack beneath him, and plunged his arm into the water up to his shoulder. The cold was a physical shock even through his thick shirt, but he got his hand around her wrist and locked his fingers. She was small, maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, which she currently was. He began pulling her toward the edge, using his other arm to brace himself. The ice groaned louder, and he felt it shift beneath him. No time for caution now. Zachariah hauled the woman up with a surge of strength that came from years of surviving in these mountains, trapping and hunting and doing whatever it took to make it through another winter. She came free of the water like a fish on a line, gasping and shaking violently. He wrapped one arm around her waist and began crawling backward, dragging her with him. The ice protested every inch of the way, cracks spreading like spider webs from the hole. 20 feet from shore, it gave way again, but Zachariah was ready. He surged to his feet and lunged for solid ground, hauling the woman with him. They crashed together onto the snowy bank just as a large section of ice collapsed behind them, with a sound like distant thunder. The woman was shaking so hard, her teeth chattered loud enough for him to hear. Her clothes were frozen stiff already in the brutal cold, ice forming in her long, dark hair. Zachariah did not waste time with questions. He scooped her up in his arms and carried her to his horse, then mounted with her positioned across his lap. He wrapped his heavy coat around both of them and kicked the bay into motion. His cabin was 3 miles up the mountain, and he covered the distance as fast as the snow would allow. The woman had stopped shaking by the time they arrived, which was more concerning than the tremors. Her breathing was shallow, her skin gray beneath its pallor. Zachariah had seen men die from cold before, and she was close. The cabin was a solid structure he had built himself from pine logs, chinked tight against the mountain winds. Inside, a fire still burned in the stone fireplace from that morning. Zachariah laid the woman on the floor near the hearth and immediately began stripping off her frozen clothes. There was no room for modesty when death was knocking. Her dress, underthings, stockings, all of it came off and was tossed aside. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then built up the fire until it roared. He stripped off his own wet coat and shirt, both soaked from pulling her out, and hung them near the fire. Then he heated water and began the slow process of warming her. Too fast, and the shock could kill her as surely as the cold. He started with lukewarm water on cloths pressed to her hands and feet, gradually increasing the temperature. It took an hour before she began to show signs of improvement. Color crept back into her face, and her breathing deepened. Another hour passed before her eyes fluttered open. She stared up at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, confusion clear in those green eyes. "Easy now," Zachariah said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe. You fell through the ice on the river. I pulled you out." She turned her head to look at him, and he saw the moment the fear set in. She tried to sit up, clutching the blankets to her chest, her eyes darting around the cabin like a trapped animal. "You are all right," he repeated. "I am not going to hurt you. Your clothes are drying by the fire. You nearly froze to death." She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Her brow furrowed, and she tried again. The word came out as a hoarse whisper. She swallowed and tried once more. "Thank you." "What were you doing out on that ice?" Zachariah asked. "There's nothing up this way but wilderness. Where were you headed?" The confusion in her eyes deepened. I cannot." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I do not remember." "You do not remember where you were going?" "I do not remember anything." Her voice rose with panic. "I do not know where I was going, or where I came from, or how I got there. I do not even—" She stopped, her breath coming faster. "I do not even remember my name." Zachariah had heard of such things. A blow to the head could steal memories, or sometimes the shock of a terrible experience. He moved closer, careful not to crowd her, and examined her head. There was a sizable lump behind her left ear, hidden by her hair. "You took a knock to the skull. Can you remember anything at all? Your family? Where you're from?" She closed her eyes, clearly trying, then shook her head, then shook. When she opened her eyes again, tears gathered in them. "Nothing. There is just nothing there. Who am I?" The fear in her voice got to him in a way he had not expected. Zachariah Norton had lived alone on this mountain for 5 years, keeping company with his horse and his traps and the occasional trip down to Animas Forks for supplies. He preferred solitude after everything that had happened. But looking at this woman, lost and frightened and completely vulnerable, something in his chest tightened. "Memory can come back," he said. "Sometimes it just takes time. You are safe here until you remember, or until we can figure out where you belong." "But what do I even call myself?" she asked, her voice small. "How can I be no one?" Zachariah thought for a moment, looking at her in the firelight. Despite the ordeal, despite the fear, there was something bright about her, something that had fought to survive in that river. "Faye," he said. "I will call you Faye for now. It means fairy, and you are small enough to be one. Faye. Taylor. Does that suit you?" She tested the name silently, her lips forming the syllables. Finally, she nodded. "Faye. All right. That is who I am, for now." "Good. I am Zachariah Norton. Most people call me Zach. You can stay here until you are well enough to travel, and we will see about getting you home, or at least to town where someone might recognize you." "Thank you, Zach." The name sounded strange in her voice, intimate somehow. "I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing." Rest now. You have been through hell today." She settled back into the blankets, exhaustion clear on her face. Within minutes, she was asleep. Zachariah sat by the fire and watched her. This mystery woman who had dropped into his solitary life like a stone into still water. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin, and fresh snow began to fall. Whatever had brought Faye to that frozen river, whatever she was running from or toward, the mountain had other plans for now. The passes would be snowed in within hours, and they would both be trapped here until the spring thaw progressed further. He should have felt burdened by this development, but as he watched the firelight play across her sleeping face, all Zachariah felt was a strange sense of rightness, as if this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The snow fell for 3 days straight, heavy and relentless, burying the mountain passes and making travel impossible. Zachariah spent the time hunting close to the cabin, checking his trap lines, and watching Faye regain her strength. Her clothes had dried, but they were thin and inadequate for the mountain cold. So he gave her one of his spare wool shirts and a pair of canvas pants that she had to roll up several times at the ankles. They were far too big on her small frame, but they were warm. She moved around the cabin with increasing confidence as the days passed, though her memory remained stubbornly absent. She would pause sometimes, her hand frozen in the middle of some task, her eyes distant as if trying to grasp something that danced just out of reach. It always ended the same way, with frustration creasing her brow and disappointment dimming her eyes. "I know how to cook," she said on the third evening, stirring the pot of stew hanging over the fire. "I must have done it often because my hands remember even if my mind does not. But I cannot remember where I learned or who taught me." "That is something at least," Zachariah said from where he sat repairing a trap. "Means your memory is in there, just locked away for now. But what if it never comes back? What if I never know who I really am?" He looked up at her, taking in the worry that had become a constant companion in her expression. "Then you will be Faye Taylor, and that will be enough. A person is more than their past. You are who you choose to be from here on." She smiled at that, a small, fragile thing that nevertheless lit up her whole face. That is a kind way of looking at it. It is the true way of looking at it. I came to this mountain to leave my past behind. Out here, a man can be whoever he decides to be. And who did you decide to be? Zachariah set down the trap, considering his answer. Someone simpler. Someone who does not carry the weight of other people's expectations. What did they expect of you, down there before? He was quiet for a long moment. It had been years since he talked about this with anyone. "I was a soldier, fought in the war. After it ended, I was supposed to come home and take over my father's ranch in Texas, marry the girl he had picked out for me, live the life he had planned. But I had seen too much, done too much. I did not fit into that neat little box anymore. So I left, came up into these mountains and built a life where the only person I had to answer to was myself." Faye stirred the stew thoughtfully. "Do you regret it? Leaving?" "No. Some men are meant for society and family and all that comes with it. I am not one of them. I need the quiet, the solitude, need to feel like I am living on my own terms." Even as he said it, though, he felt the irony. Here he was, sharing his cabin with a woman, having conversations that dug deeper than surface pleasantries, and he had not minded it once. "It sounds lonely," she said softly. "Lonely and alone are different things. I have been surrounded by people and felt more lonely than I ever have up here." She served the stew, and they ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the wind had finally died down, and through the cabin's single window, Zachariah could see stars emerging in a clear sky. Tomorrow would be a good day to check the further trap lines, maybe hunt for elk in the high meadows. He glanced at Faye, wondering if she was strong enough to be left alone for most of a day. As if reading his thoughts, she said, "You do not have to stay close on my account. I am well enough now. You have work to do, and I can manage here." "You sure about that? You are still recovering." "I am sure. Besides, I will go mad if I have to spend another day staring at these four walls wondering who I am. At least if I am useful, I can stop thinking so much." He nodded slowly. "All right. But you keep the fire going and keep the rifle by the door. Wolves come down from the high country sometimes when food is scarce." Her eyes widened slightly. "Wolves? Probably will not be a problem, but better to be prepared. You ever fire a gun?" She looked at the rifle propped by the door, then back at him. "I do not know. Should we find out?" The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun turning the snow-covered peaks into blazing white giants against the blue sky. Zachariah took Faye outside and taught her to load and fire the rifle. She handled it awkwardly at first, but after a few tries, something seemed to click into place. Her stance improved, her aim steadied, and she put 3 shots within inches of each other on the tree trunk he had marked as a target. "I have done this before," she said, lowering the rifle with wonder in her voice. "I know I have. My body remembers." "Good. That means you can protect yourself if you need to." He showed her how to load the pistol he kept in the cabin as well, then made sure she knew where he stored the ammunition. "I should be back before dark, but if I am not, do not worry. Sometimes the hunting takes longer than expected." "Be careful," she said, and there was something in her tone that made him pause. Concern, yes, but something more, something that made his chest feel tight. "Always am," he said, then headed out with his rifle and his pack. The day was good for hunting. Zachariah tracked an elk herd into one of the high meadows and brought down a young bull with a clean shot. He field-dressed it, loaded as much meat as he could carry onto his shoulders, and made note of where he left the rest for a second trip. The work was familiar and meditative, the kind of task that usually emptied his mind of everything but the present moment. But today, his thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin, to Faye moving around in his clothes, her dark hair catching the firelight, that small smile she gave when something pleased her. He found himself working faster, wanting to get back before the light failed completely. The sun was touching the western peaks when he crested the final ridge above the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sight, and he could see lamplight in the window. Something about it struck him deeply. The realization that he was coming home to someone, that there was a person waiting who would be glad to see him return safely. Faye opened the door before he could knock, his hands being full of elk meat. "You made it back," she said, relief clear in her voice. "I was starting to worry. Told you not to." But he was smiling as he carried the meat inside and deposited it on the table. "Got us enough here to last a good while. I will go back tomorrow for the rest." "I made bread," she said, gesturing to 2 loaves cooling near the fire. "Found your flour and starter. I must have baked before because I did not even have to think about how." Zachariah picked up one of the loaves and inhaled. Fresh bread was a luxury he rarely had, living alone. "Smells like heaven." They worked together to butcher and salt the meat, falling into an easy rhythm. Faye asked questions about the mountain, about the wildlife, about how he survived the winters. Zachariah found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories about close calls with bears, about the time he got caught in an early blizzard and had to hole up in a cave for 3 days, about the strange beauty of the high country that few people ever witnessed. "It sounds like you love it here," she said. "I do. It is hard living, but it is honest. The mountain does not lie to you. It is harsh but fair." "And you have really been alone up here for 5 years?" "More or less. I go down to Animus Forks every few months for supplies. Maybe stay a night at the boarding house. But mostly it is just me in the mountain." "Does not it get to you? Never having anyone to talk to?" Zachariah hung strips of meat to smoke near the fire, considering. "I thought I preferred it that way. Figured I had said all I needed to say during the war and the years before it. But..." He trailed off, not sure how to finish that thought. "But," she prompted gently, "but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I have just been hiding up here instead of living." Faye was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think you are living, just differently than most people. That does not make it hiding. Maybe. Or maybe it took someone falling through the ice for me to realize what I have been missing." Their eyes met across the cabin, and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of the connection growing despite the strange circumstances. Faye looked away first, color rising in her cheeks. "We should eat," she said, "before the food gets cold." That night, after Faye had gone to sleep in his bed while he made himself a pallet by the fire, Zachariah lay awake and stared at the ceiling. He had given her the bed without discussion that first night, and they had fallen into the routine without questioning it, but he was intensely aware of her presence, of the soft sound of her breathing, of the way she murmured in her sleep sometimes, as if her dreams held the memories her waking mind could not reach. He had been alone so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share space with another person, to adjust his movements and plans around someone else's needs. It should have chafed, should have made him long for his solitude. Instead, he found he liked it. Liked having her there. Liked the sound of another voice, the sight of her small form moving through his cabin, the way she looked at him with trust and growing warmth. It was dangerous territory, these feelings. She did not even know who she was, might have a husband or family somewhere desperate to find her. When her memory returned, when they finally made it to town and someone recognized her, she would go back to her real life. This strange interlude on the mountain would end, and he would return to his solitude. The thought sat heavy in his chest, an ache he had no business feeling. 2 more days passed in their isolated world. The weather held clear and cold, and Zachariah made the trip to retrieve the rest of the elk meat. When he returned, he found Faye had cleaned the entire cabin, reorganized his haphazard shelves, and made a stew that tasted better than anything he had cooked in years. "You have been busy," he said, looking around at the transformation. "I needed something to do with my hands. I hope you do not mind that I move things around." "Mind? Place has never looked this good. You are welcome to organize whatever you want." She smiled, pleased. "I found these while I was cleaning." She held up a small bundle of letters tied with string. "They fell from behind your shelf. I did not read them, but they are addressed to you from someone named Margaret." Zachariah felt his jaw tighten. He took the letters and looked at the familiar handwriting. "My mother. She wrote for a while after I left, trying to convince me to come home. I stopped reading them eventually. Do you miss her?" "Sometimes, but not enough to go back." He tossed the letters into the fire without opening them. Faye watched them burn, her expression thoughtful. "I wonder if anyone misses me," she said quietly. if anyone is looking. I am sure there is someone. Woman like you does not just vanish without people noticing. Woman like me? You do not even know me. I know enough. You are smart, capable, brave. You fight to survive instead of giving up. Those are not common qualities. She looked at him, something vulnerable in her eyes. What if, when I remember, I am not someone worth knowing? What if there is a reason I ended up alone in the wilderness? Zachariah crossed the space between them and took her hand, surprising them both with a gesture. Her fingers were small and warm in his. Then you become someone new, someone better. Like I said before, you are who you choose to be. Is that what you did? Choose to be someone better? I chose to be someone different. Better is still a work in progress. She laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed her face. Well, for what it is worth, I think you are a good man, Zachariah Norton. You saved my life and asked for nothing in return. You have been kind and patient when you could have just as easily left me to fend for myself. That speaks to who you are. He was still holding her hand, he realized, and she had not pulled away. Her skin was soft against his work-roughened palm, and he could feel her pulse beating steady and strong. I think maybe we saved each other, he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Zachariah found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he could not name. Faye's lips parted slightly, her eyes locked on his. He could count the faint freckles across her nose, could see gold flecks in her green eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. Then a log shifted in the fire with a sharp crack, and the spell broke. They stepped apart, both suddenly interested in anything but each other. The tension remained, though, humming in the air like a plucked string. I should check the trap lines, Zachariah said, his voice rougher than usual. In the dark? There is enough moonlight. He grabbed his coat and headed out into the night, needing distance to clear his head. What was he thinking, nearly kissing a woman who did not even know her own name? She was vulnerable, dependent on him, and he had no right to complicate things with feelings that had no future. But as he walked the familiar paths through the snow-covered forest, checking traps by moonlight, he could not escape the truth. He was already in too deep. Somewhere in the past few days, Faye had stopped being a responsibility and become someone he cared about. Someone whose smile made his day brighter, whose presence made his cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to shelter from the weather. He was in trouble, and he knew it. When he returned hours later, Faye was asleep, but she had left a lamp burning low for him. The small gesture touched him more than it should have. He sat by the dying fire and watched her sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the dark fan of her lashes, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Whatever came next, whoever she turned out to be, these days on the mountain with her would be something he carried forever. For the first time in 5 years, Zachariah Norton felt truly alive, and he had a woman pulled from a frozen river to thank for it. The next week passed in a strange sort of domesticity that Zachariah had never experienced before. He and Faye fell into routines as if they had been living together for years instead of days. She rose early and made coffee while he tended the fire. They ate breakfast together, then he would head out for the day's work while she managed the cabin. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from his past and speculating about hers. Her memory remained frustratingly absent, though fragments would surface occasionally. She knew she liked the smell of sage, though she could not remember why. She caught herself humming a melody that she swore was important, but could not place. Once, while mending one of his shirts, she stopped suddenly and said, "I had a sister. I am almost sure of it. Someone younger who I had to take care of." "That is good," Zachariah encouraged. "The memories are coming. Give it time." But part of him, the selfish part he tried to ignore, was glad for the delay. Every day her memory did not return was another day she stayed with him, another day of this unexpected happiness. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after he pulled her from the river, Zachariah was cutting firewood behind the cabin when he heard Faye scream. He dropped the axe and ran, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. He burst through the door ready for wolves or worse, only to find Faye pressed against the far wall, staring at the bed. "What is it?" he demanded, searching for the threat. "Snake," she gasped, pointing with a shaking hand. "Under the bed. It was on the floor and I almost stepped on it." Zachariah moved cautiously to the bed and looked underneath. Sure enough, a timber rattler about 3 feet long was coiled in the shadows, its tongue flicking out to taste the air. It must have come in looking for warmth and found the cabin to its liking. "Stay back," he told Faye. He grabbed a long stick and carefully prodded the snake, encouraging it toward the door. The rattler, sluggish from the cold, moved reluctantly. After several tense minutes, Zachariah managed to guide it outside and watched it slither away into the trees. When he came back in, Faye was still pressed against the wall, her face pale. "I hate snakes," she said. "I know that much. I really, really hate them. It is gone now? Harmless enough if you leave them alone. But I will check more carefully before we go to bed from now on. How did it even get in? Probably a gap in the chinking somewhere. I will look for it and seal it up." He studied her, noticing the tremors in her hands. "You all right?" "I think so. Just startled me." She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "Silly, being scared of a snake when I survived falling through ice. Not silly. Everyone has their fears." He crossed to her and, without thinking about it, pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He could feel her heart racing. They stood like that for a long moment, and Zachariah was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. When she finally pulled back, her hands lingered on his chest, and she looked up at him with those green eyes that had haunted his thoughts for days. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Not just the snake, but all of it. I do not know what I would have done without you. You are stronger than you think. You would have found a way. Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to." Her hands were still on his chest, and she seemed to become aware of it at the same time he did. She started to pull away, but he caught her wrists gently, holding her there. "Faye," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He struggled for the right words, knowing he was about to cross a line that could not be uncrossed. "These past 2 weeks, having you here, they have been the best weeks I can remember in a long time. I know this is complicated. No, you do not even have all your memories back yet. But I need you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should." Her eyes searched his face, and he saw his own feelings reflected there, the same uncertainty and hope and desire. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, because what if I remember a husband or man I was meant to marry? What if I am promised to someone? But every day that passes, I find myself caring less about what might have been and more about what is happening right now. What is happening right now? I think I am falling in love with a mountain man who pulled me from a frozen river and gave me a name when I had nothing." The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. "Faye, I know it is fast. I know it does not make sense. But sense stopped mattering the moment I woke up or when saw you looking down at me like I was something precious you had found instead of a burden you had been saddled with." Zachariah framed her face with his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You have never been a burden. Never." Then he kissed her, finally crossing that line he had been dancing around for days. She kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own, her arms coming up around his neck, her fingers tangling in his long hair. The kiss was deep and desperate, fueled by 2 weeks of tension and longing and the strange intimacy of their situation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachariah rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said. "I hope so." She smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed her whole face. "Because I do not want to go back to pretending there is nothing between us. There is definitely something between us." He kissed her again, softer this time, savoring it. "But we need to be smart about this. When the pass is clear enough to travel, we need to go to town, see if anyone knows you. You deserve to know who you are, to have your full life back. What if my full life does not include you? Then we will deal with that when we come to it. But I am not going to be the man who takes advantage of a woman in a vulnerable position. If we do this, if we really do this, I need to know you are choosing me with all the information. That means getting your memory back, or at least trying to find out where you came from." Faye nodded slowly. "You are right. I know you are right. But can I tell you something? Anything. Even if I remember everything tomorrow, even if I have a whole other life waiting for me somewhere, I do not think I will ever regret these days with you. You gave me more than a name, Zach. You gave me a place to belong when I was lost." He pulled her close again, holding her tight against his chest. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the cabin. But inside they were warm and safe and together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them. But for now, for this moment, Zachariah let himself be happy. The weather turned warmer over the next few days, the sun strong enough at midday to melt the snow in patches. Water dripped from the cabin's eaves, and the sound of the swollen river could be heard echoing up from the valley. Spring was coming, which meant the passes would clear soon, which meant their isolated time together was coming to an end. Zachariah tried not to think about it, but the knowledge hung over him like a storm cloud. He and Faye had grown closer since that first kiss, stealing moments together when the work allowed. She would come up behind him while he was skinning a rabbit and wrap her arms around his waist. Or he would pull her onto his lap in the evenings while she tried to read from his small collection of books by firelight. They had not taken things further than kissing, though the temptation was there. Zachariah was determined to keep his promise to himself, to wait until they knew more about her past. But it was getting harder to remember why that mattered. Faye was here, real and warm, and choosing him every moment of every day. What did it matter who she had been before the river took those memories? "You are brooding," Faye said one evening as they sat by the fire. She was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, just thinking. About how much I do not want this to end. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "It does not have to. Even if we go to town, even if we find out where I came from, that does not mean anything has to change between us. You do not know that. You might have obligations, people who need you. Then I will figure it out. but I am not going to give you up without a fight, Zachariah Norton. She tilted her head to look up at him. Unless you want me to. God, no. He tightened his arm around her. I want you here. Want you in my life. I just do not want you to have regrets later when the newness wears off and you realize what you gave up. The only thing I will regret is if we waste the time we have worrying about what might happen instead of enjoying what is. She shifted to straddle his lap, facing him directly. The position was intimate, and Zachariah felt his body respond immediately. I am here now. You are here now. That is what matters. He ran his hands up her sides, feeling the curve of her waist even through his oversized shirt that she wore. You are making it very hard to be noble. Good, I do not want noble. I want you. She kissed him, slow and deep, and he was lost. They made love for the first time that night in front of the fire, with the shadows dancing on the walls and the wind singing outside. Zachariah tried to be gentle, mindful of her smaller size and the possibility that this might be new for her. But Faye met him with equal passion, her body arching into his as if they had been made to fit together. Afterwards, they lay tangled in the blankets, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. I love you, she said into the comfortable silence. I know I should not say it yet. No, it is too fast. But it is true. Whatever my name was before, whoever I was. Right now I am Faye, and I am in love with you. Zachariah felt something break open in his chest, some wall he had been holding in place for years. I love you too. Was not planning on it, was not looking for it. But there it is. She propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him, her dark hair falling around them like a curtain. So what do we do now? Now we figure out the rest together. We go to town when the pass is clear. We find out what we can about where you came from. And then we make a plan based on what we learn. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But whatever happens, I want you to know something. This, right here, you and me, this is real. This is not just some mountain fever or loneliness. You have changed me, Faye, made me realize I do not want to spend the rest of my life alone up here. Does that mean you would leave the mountain? For me? He thought about it, really considered it. If that is what you needed, yes. But I hope maybe there is a middle ground, a way to have both. I like that idea. Though I have to say, after these weeks up here, I am not sure I am suited for town life anyway. I like the quiet, like the simplicity, like waking up to nothing but mountains and sky. Even with the snakes? She laughed. Okay, I could do without the snakes. But the rest of it, yes. This feels right to me in a way I cannot explain, like I was meant to end up here. Maybe you were. Maybe that frozen river was not just bad luck, but fate bringing you to where you needed to be. I never took you for a romantic. I am not, usually. But you bring it out in me. He pulled her down for another kiss, and the conversation drifted away into something more physical, more urgent. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and responses, building something that felt like permanence, even in the midst of uncertainty. 3 days later, they made the journey down to Animus Forks. The town was small, barely more than a mining camp perched in a mountain valley, but it had a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a population of about 200 hardy souls who made their living pulling silver and gold from the surrounding mountains. Zachariah had not been to town in months, and people stared as he rode in with Faye sitting in front of him on the horse. They went first to the general store, where the proprietor, a weathered man named Henry Walsh, looked Faye over with undisguised curiosity. "This is Faye Taylor," Zachariah said, using the name he had given her. "She had an accident a few weeks back, hit her head and lost her memory. I was hoping someone around here might recognize her." Henry studied her closely, then shook his head. "Cannot say that I do. How about you, Martha?" He called to his wife, who was arranging canned goods on a shelf. Martha Walsh came over, a stout woman with sharp eyes. She looked Faye up and down, taking in her borrowed clothes and the lingering signs of her ordeal. "No, I do not know her. When did you say this happened?" "Beginning of March. Found her after she fell through the ice on the Animas River." "Mercy," Martha said. "You are lucky to be alive, girl. But I have not seen you before." "You could have been passing through, though. We get prospectors and their families coming and going all season." They spent the rest of the morning asking around town, but no one recognized Faye. The sheriff, a middle-aged man named Cobb, took down what information they had and promised to ask around at the neighboring camps and settlements. But he was not optimistic. If she was traveling alone through this country in winter, she either ran away from something or was running to something. Either way, might be that no one knows she is missing. He tipped his hat to Faye. "Sorry I cannot be more help, miss. If anything turns up, I will send word to Zach here." They bought supplies at the general store, Zachariah purchasing fabric for a proper dress for Faye, along with warmer clothes that actually fit her. Martha Walsh offered to make up the dress, and Faye stayed at the boarding house that night for a fitting while. Zachariah saw to some business with the trading post about his furs. He did not like being separated from her, even for a few hours in a relatively safe town. The feeling surprised him with its intensity. 5 years ago, he could not wait to be away from people, to have space and solitude. Now, after just a few weeks with Faye, he felt incomplete when she was not nearby. When he collected her that evening, she was wearing a new dress of deep blue wool that matched her eyes. Martha had done good work, and the dress fit Faye perfectly, highlighting her small waist and the curves he had come to know well over the past few days. She smiled when she saw him, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "What do you think?" she asked, doing a small turn. "I think you are beautiful," he said honestly, "but I liked you just as well in my old shirts." She laughed. "I did too, but it is nice to have something that fits." Mrs. Walsh was very kind. She packed me 2 more dresses and some other necessities. They stayed the night at the boarding house, taking separate rooms to maintain propriety, though Zachariah slipped into hers after dark, and they lay together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers. "No one knows me," Faye said, and he could not quite read her tone. There was relief there, but also disappointment. Part of me hoped someone would recognize me, would be able to tell me my story. But another part is glad. Is that terrible? No. It means you get to choose what comes next instead of having it chosen for you. "I choose you," she said simply. "And the mountain. I want to go home, Zach." His arms tightened around her. "Then we will. First thing in the morning." They left Animas Forks at dawn, laden with supplies and with no more answers than when they had arrived. Sheriff Cobb promised to keep asking around, to check with the towns further down the valley. But Zachariah was not holding his breath. Faye had appeared out of nowhere, a mystery that might never be solved. And he found he was all right with that. The ride back up the mountain was easier than the trip down, the trail mostly clear of snow. Spring was truly arriving, bringing with it wildflowers and green grass and the promise of warmer days. They stopped at a meadow halfway home to let the horse rest and drink from a stream swollen with snowmelt. Faye wandered through the flowers, picking a bouquet of columbines and mountain daisies. She looked like something out of a painting, her blue dress bright against the landscape, her dark hair loose and shining in the sun. Zachariah watched her and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "This is perfect," Faye called to him. "I never want to leave." "We do not have to. We can stay right here if you want." She laughed and came back to him, tucking a flower behind his ear. "I think the horse might object. But yes, let us go home. Let us start building a real life." That is what they did. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged the shift in their relationship. Zachariah built an addition onto the cabin, expanding it to include a proper bedroom and more storage. Faye planted a garden in a sunny spot near the door, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with a skill that suggested she had done this before. They talked about the future, making plans that stretched into years. Zachariah taught her to shoot better, to track game, to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. She taught him things too, though neither of them knew where she had learned them. She could read and write better than he could, and she started writing down their stories in a journal she had bought in town. She knew herbal remedies for common ailments, could preserve food a dozen different ways, could manage a household with an efficiency that spoke of experience. "I must have been someone's wife," she said one day while they were working in the garden together. "Or at least managing a house for someone. I know too much about this kind of work for it to be anything else." The thought had occurred to Zachariah too, though he had not wanted to voice it. "Does that bother you? Not knowing?" "Less than it did at first. There are still moments when I feel like I am on the verge of remembering, like the answer is right there if I could just grasp it. But then the moment passes, and I realize I am happy anyway. Maybe that makes me a terrible person, walking away from some other life without even knowing what I am leaving behind. Or maybe it makes you someone who understands that the past does not have to define the future." He took her hand, dirty from the soil they had been working. "We all have things we would rather forget. Difference is, you got a clean slate. Most people would kill for that chance. Is that what you want? A clean slate?" "No, I want this exactly as it is. Want you, want this life we are building. The past can stay where it belongs." But the past, as it turned out, had other ideas. It was a day in late May, warm enough that they had the cabin door propped open to let in the breeze when a rider appeared on the trail. Visitors were rare this high up, and Zachariah grabbed his rifle by instinct before going to see who it was. The man was young, maybe 25, and well-dressed for the mountains. He rode a good horse and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. He pulled up when he saw Zachariah and tipped his hat. "Afternoon. I am looking for Zachariah Norton. Would that be you?" "It would. What can I do for you?" "Name is Thomas Bradford. Sheriff Cobb down in Animas Forks sent me up this way. Said you might have information about a missing woman." He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "Her name is Flora Thorne. Disappeared from her wagon train back in early March. I have been searching for her for months." The world seemed to tilt. Zachariah took the paper and unfolded it to reveal a rough sketch. The face looking back at him was unmistakably Faye, though the hair was styled differently, and the artist had given her a harder expression than she ever wore. "You know her?" Thomas asked, clearly reading the recognition on Zachariah's face. Before he could answer, Faye appeared in the cabin doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. She stopped when she saw the stranger, wariness in her posture. Thomas went completely still, his eyes locked on her. "Flora? Flora, oh, thank God. I have been searching everywhere for you." He dismounted and started toward her, but Zachariah stepped into his path. "Hold on. Who are you to her?" "I am her fiancé," Thomas said, his voice tight with emotion. "We were traveling to California to be married when she vanished from the wagon train. One morning she was just gone, no sign of where she went or what happened. I have been retracing the route ever since, asking everywhere." Zachariah felt like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to look at Faye, saw the confusion and dawning horror in her face. "I do not know him," she said, her voice shaking. "Zach, I do not remember him at all." "It is all right," Thomas said, his tone soothing. "The sheriff told me you lost your memory. I can help you remember. We were going to start a new life together, Flora. You were so excited about California, about the opportunities there." "My name is Faye," she said. But there was uncertainty in it now. "That is what I have been calling her," Zachariah explained. "She could not remember her name when I found her." Thomas nodded, still looking at Faye with something like wonder. "Of course, but your real name is Flora Thorne. We met in Kansas City last fall. I was there on business. You were working at your aunt's boarding house. We fell in love, and I asked you to marry me. You said yes." He pulled something else from his pocket, a small velvet box. "I still have the ring I bought you." Faye pressed a hand to her forehead. I cannot." "It is okay," Thomas said gently. "I am sure it will come back to you. The important thing is that you are safe. I thought I had lost you forever." He looked at Zachariah. "Thank you for taking care of her. I owe you a debt I can never repay. But I can take her off your hands now. We will head back to Kansas City, give her time to recover, and then continue on to California when she is ready." "She is not going anywhere." "Not going," Zachariah heard himself say. "Not until she decides what she wants." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "With all respect, Mr. Norton, she is my fiancée. She belongs with me." "I do not belong to anyone," Faye said, finding her voice. Her hands were shaking, but her tone was firm. "I appreciate you coming to find me, Mr. Bradford. But I do not know you. I do not remember you or any engagement. Until I do, if I do, I am staying here. Flora, be reasonable. You cannot stay up here in the wilderness with a stranger. It is not proper, and it is not safe. Zachariah is not a stranger. He saved my life, and I am safer here than I have ever felt anywhere." She moved to stand beside Zachariah, close enough that their arms brushed. The gesture was not lost on Thomas, whose eyes narrowed. "I see," he said slowly. "And exactly what is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Norton?" "That is none of your concern," Zachariah said, his voice hard. "It is very much my concern if my fiancée has been compromised." "Watch your mouth," Zachariah warned, his hand dropping to his pistol. "Gentlemen, please." Faye stepped between them. "This is not helping. Mr. Bradford, I am sorry for whatever pain my disappearance has caused you. Truly I am. But I cannot just leave with you. I need time to process this, to see if my memory returns. Surely you can understand that." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but after a long moment he nodded stiffly. "Of course. I will stay in Animas Forks for a few weeks. That should give you time to remember. But Flora, please know that I love you. I have loved you since the moment we met, and I've spent months searching for you. Whatever has happened here, we can move past it. We can still have the life we planned." He remounted his horse and looked down at her one more time. "I will come back in 2 weeks. I hope by then you will have remembered what we mean to each other. He tipped his hat to Zachariah, though the gesture was cold. "Mr. Norton." They watched him ride back down the trail until he disappeared around a bend. When he was gone, Faye turned to Zachariah, tears streaming down her face. "I do not remember him," she said. "I swear I do not." There was nothing, not even a flicker of recognition. How can that be if we were engaged? If I loved him? Zachariah pulled her into his arms, his own heart aching. Memory is a strange thing. Maybe it will come back, maybe it will not. "Do you believe him? Do you think I was really his fiancée?" He wanted to say no, wanted to dismiss Thomas Bradford as a liar or a con man. But the sketch had been accurate, and the story fit the circumstances of how she had ended up in the wilderness. "I think he believes it," he said carefully. "Whether it is true or not, I cannot say for certain. What if it is true? What if I was engaged to him and I just cannot remember? That would make what we have been doing." "Do not," he said firmly. "Do not go down that path. You did not know. You still do not know. And until you remember for yourself, all we have to go on is what you feel right now." "I feel like my whole world just got turned upside down." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes desperate. "Tell me it does not matter. Tell me that even if I was engaged to him, even if that is all true, it does not change us." Zachariah wanted to say it, wanted to promise her that nothing could change what they had. But he could not lie to her, not about something this important. "I love you," he said instead. "That is the only truth I know for certain. Whatever else happens, that does not change." It was not the answer she wanted. He could see it in her face. But it was the honest one. And in that moment, honesty was all he had to give. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Zachariah's life. Faye tried to go on as if nothing had changed. But Thomas Bradford's arrival had shattered the peaceful world they had built together. She would stop in the middle of tasks, her expression distant, clearly trying to force memories that refused to come. At night, she clung to Zachariah as if afraid he might disappear, and they made love with a desperate intensity that spoke of borrowed time. "I do not love him," she said one night, lying in his arms. "I know I do not, because what I feel for you is so much stronger than anything I can imagine feeling for a stranger. If I had loved Thomas Bradford enough to agree to marry him, surely I would feel something when I looked at him. But there was nothing. Memory does not work that way," Zachariah said, though the words hurt to speak. "You could have loved him deeply and still not remember because of the injury. The heart might know something the mind has forgotten." "Do you want me to remember?" she asked, propping herself up to look at him. "Do you want me to go with him?" "God, no. I want you here with me, want to spend the rest of my life waking up next to you. But Faye, if you really were engaged to him, if you made him a promise before you lost your memory, I cannot be the man who keeps you from honoring that. It would not be right. What if I do not care about right? What if I just care about us?" He framed her face with his hands, memorizing every detail in the lamplight. "Then we will figure it out together. But you need to know the whole truth first. Need to know what you are giving up." She searched his eyes, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks. He said 2 weeks. We have 5 days left. Then let us make them count. They did. Those 5 days were bittersweet, filled with stolen moments and unspoken fears. They rode up to the high meadows and watched the sunset paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. They made love under the stars, wrapped in blankets by a campfire. They talked about everything and nothing, storing up memories against an uncertain future. On the 13th day after Thomas Bradford's visit, Faye woke with a gasp. Zachariah was instantly alert, checking for danger, but she was just sitting up in bed, her hand pressed to her temple. "What is it?" he asked. "Your head." "I remembered something," she said, her voice shaking. Just a flash, but it was clear. I was in a wagon, and there was a man sitting across from me. We were talking about California, about starting over, and I was happy. Zachariah's chest tightened. "Did you see his face?" "No. It was just gone too quickly." "But Zach, what if it was him? What if I really was going to marry him?" "Then we will deal with it. Together or apart, we will deal with it." The next morning, Thomas Bradford returned. He rode up to the cabin looking tired but determined. Zachariah and Faye met him outside, both dressed and ready, though neither had slept much. "Flora," Thomas said, dismounting, "have you remembered anything?" "Pieces," she admitted. "Nothing clear, but yes, some pieces. I think maybe I was on a wagon train heading to California. And I think maybe you were there." Hope flared in Thomas's face. "You are remembering. That is wonderful. The rest will come, I am sure of it. Are you ready to come back to civilization? To start recovering your life?" Faye looked at Zachariah, and he saw the question in her eyes. He wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to beg her not to leave, but he had meant what he said. She needed to know the truth before she could make a real choice. "Go," he said quietly. "Go to town with him. Talk. See if being around him helps you remember more. If you are really meant to be with him, you deserve to know." "And if I remember that I love him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Then I will let you go, because I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness is not with me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I do not want to leave you. I know, but you need to do this. For both of us." He turned to Thomas. "I am trusting you with the most important thing in my life. You take care of her, you hear me? Any harm comes to her, any at all, and I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Thomas nodded stiffly. "I would never hurt Flora. I love her." "Then prove it. Give her the space she needs to figure this out." Faye packed a small bag while Thomas waited outside. When she came back out, she threw herself into Zachariah's arms one last time. "I love you," she said fiercely. "No matter what I remember, that will not change." "I love you too. Now go before I lose my nerve and refuse to let you leave." He watched them ride away, Faye on the horse behind Thomas, looking back at him until they disappeared around the bend. Then Zachariah went into the empty cabin and sat down in front of the cold fireplace, feeling more alone than he had in all his 5 years on the mountain. The days that followed were endless. Zachariah tried to keep busy, checking his trap lines, hunting, working on improvements to the cabin that no longer seemed to matter. But everything reminded him of Faye. The garden she had planted, the books she had been reading, the smell of her on the pillow. He had thought he understood loneliness before. But this was different. This was the aching absence of someone who had become part of his soul. A week passed with no word. Then another. Zachariah began to accept that she was not coming back, that her memories had returned, and she had chosen her previous life over what they had built together. He tried to tell himself he was happy for her, that this was what he had wanted. But it was a lie. He was miserable and angry and heartbroken in a way he had never experienced before. He was chopping wood behind the cabin 3 weeks after she left when he heard a horse approaching. His heart leaped, but he forced himself to stay calm. It might not be her. Could be Thomas coming to thank him, or even Sheriff Cobb, with news. But when he came around the cabin, it was Faye sitting on a horse, alone. She looked thinner, tired, but her eyes were clear and determined. She dismounted before he could speak and walked straight to him. "My name was Flora Thorne," she said without preamble. "I was 23 years old. I worked at my aunt's boarding house in Kansas City after my parents died of cholera. Thomas Bradford stayed at the boarding house for a month while he conducted business. He was kind and attentive, and when he asked me to marry him and come to California, I said yes." Zachariah felt each word like a knife. "So you remember everything?" "Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that while I may have agreed to marry Thomas, I was not in love with him. I was lonely and scared, and he offered me security. It was a practical decision, not a romantic one. That does not change the fact that you made him a promise." "No, it does not." So I told him the truth, told him everything that happened here, everything between us. I did not hide it or minimize it. I told him I had fallen in love with someone else and that I could not marry him. Zachariah's heart was pounding. What did he say? He was angry at first, called me a lot of names I probably deserved. But eventually he calmed down and we talked like adults. He admitted that he had noticed I was not fully present during our engagement, that I seemed to be going through the motions. He said he had hoped it would change once we were married, once we started our new life. But he understood that it would not be fair to either of us to go through with it now. "So, you are really here? You are staying?" "If you will have me. I know I hurt you by leaving. I know these past weeks must have been hell. But I needed to know, needed to be certain I was making the right choice, with full knowledge of what I was giving up." She stepped closer, looking up at him with those green eyes that had captured him from the first moment. "I am Flora Thorne, but I want to be Faye Norton. I want to stay on this mountain with you and build a life, and maybe someday have a family. That is the life I choose, Zach. Not because I do not know any better, but because I know exactly what I am choosing." Zachariah pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You are sure? California, civilization, all the things Thomas could have given you?" "I am sure. My life began the day you pulled me from that river. Everything before that is just backstory. You are my present and my future, if you want to be. I want to be. God, I want to be." He pulled back to look at her. "Marry me. Not for practicality or security, but because I love you more than I thought I could love anything. Marry me and be my wife, and we will make this life whatever we want it to be." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all his relief and joy and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Faye smiled up at him. "Take me inside, husband. We are not married yet. Close enough. Besides, we have to make up for 3 weeks apart." He swept her up into his arms and carried her into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. Outside, the mountain peaks stood watch under an endless blue sky, and the river that had brought them together flowed on toward some distant sea. But inside the cabin, 2 people who had been lost had finally found their way home. They were married a week later by a traveling preacher who happened through Animas Forks. The ceremony was simple, held in the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Walsh and the sheriff as witnesses. Faye wore the blue dress that Zachariah loved, and he cleaned up as best he could, trimming his beard and tying back his hair. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Zachariah kissed her with a passion that made Mrs. Walsh fan herself and earned a chuckle from the sheriff. They spent one night in town, celebrating with a dinner at the boarding house and drinks at the saloon. But both were eager to return to the mountain. Their real life was there, in the cabin they were making into a home. The summer passed in blissful domesticity. Zachariah taught Faye to fish, and she proved to have a natural talent for it. They worked together to expand the garden, adding herbs and more vegetables. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the stars come out, talking about their plans for the future. "I want children," Faye said one night, her head on his shoulder. "At least 2, maybe more if we are blessed." "I want that too," Zachariah admitted. "Never thought I did until I met you, but now I can picture it. Little ones running around, learning to love this place the way we do." "Will you teach our sons to trap and hunt? And our daughters, if they want to learn? Everyone should know how to survive on their own." She smiled. "You are going to be such a good father." "You think so?" "I know so. You are patient and kind and strong. Our children will be lucky to have you." As summer turned to fall, Faye began to suspect she might be pregnant. The signs were subtle at first: a missed monthly cycle, a strange sensitivity to smells. But by October, there was no doubt. She told Zachariah one evening while they were preparing dinner. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. He froze in the middle of skinning a rabbit, then slowly set down his knife. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I think so." Zachariah crossed to her in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." Faye laughed, holding on tight. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and so full of love, I think my heart might burst." They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Zachariah built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small flowers into the headboard. Faye sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, her hands gentle and sure despite never remembering doing this before. They talked about names, about their hopes and fears for this new life they had created. "What if I do not know how to be a mother?" Faye asked one night, her hands on her growing belly. "What if whatever life I had before, whatever mother I had, is not enough to guide me? Then you will figure it out as you go, same as every other parent in the world. No one knows what they are doing at first. We will learn together." The baby came in early April, right as the first wildflowers were pushing through the melting snow. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachariah feared he would lose them both. But Faye was strong, stronger than he had ever seen her, and when the dawn broke, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed off the mountain peaks. "He is perfect," Faye said, exhausted but radiant as she held the baby against her chest. "Look at him, Zach. We made this perfect little person." Zachariah looked down at his son, at the tiny red face and the shock of dark hair, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what he had been missing all those years alone on the mountain. Not just love, but purpose, family, legacy. "What should we call him?" Faye asked. They had discussed names for months, but now, looking at his son, Zachariah knew. "Samuel. After my brother who died in the war. He would have loved being an uncle." "Samuel Norton. It is a strong name." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "We have our own family now, Zach. Our own little piece of forever." "We do, and I am never going to take it for granted, not for a single day." The years that followed were the happiest of Zachariah's life. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the mountain as much as his parents did. 2 years after his birth, they had a daughter they named Rose, who proved to have her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. And 3 years after that, another son, Jacob, who was quieter than his siblings, but just as loved. They expanded the cabin twice to accommodate their growing family, adding rooms and a proper kitchen. Zachariah taught the children to ride and hunt and fish, to read the weather and respect the wilderness. Faye taught them letters and numbers, told them stories, and filled their home with love and laughter. Sometimes, when Zachariah looked at his wife across the dinner table, surrounded by their children, he marveled at how his life had changed. From a lonely man hiding from his past to a husband and father with everything to live for. And it had all started with a woman falling through ice and a decision to jump in and after her. Faye never did recover all her memories of her life before the river. Pieces would surface occasionally, usually triggered by some smell or sound or sensation, but the full picture remained elusive. She remembered her parents in flashes, remembered the boarding house and her aunt, but the details of her engagement to Thomas Bradford stayed fuzzy, more like a story someone had told her than something she had lived. She did not mind. As she told Zachariah often, her real life had begun the day he pulled her from that frozen water and gave her a name. Everything before that was just prologue. When Samuel was 10, Rose 8, and Jacob 5, they took a family trip down to Animas Forks for supplies. The town had grown over the years, more prospectors flooding in as silver strikes became more common. It was busier than Zachariah liked, but the children enjoyed the rare excursion into civilization. They were in the general store when a woman approached Faye. She was older, maybe 50, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, "but are you Flora Thorne?" Faye looked at the woman, searching her face. Something stirred in her memory, something familiar. "I was, yes, a long time ago." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I thought so. You probably do not remember me. I am your Aunt Catherine from Kansas City. When you disappeared, I searched for months. I thought you were dead." Memory came flooding back, sharper than it had in years. The boarding house, this woman who had taken her in after her parents died, the small room they had shared. "Aunt Catherine," Faye breathed, "I am so sorry. I did not. I could not. I heard about your memory loss from that Thomas Bradford fellow. He came back through after you disappeared and said he had found you, but that you could not remember anything. By the time I got here to look for you, you were gone again. I have been hoping for years that you were alive somewhere, happy." Faye introduced her aunt to Zachariah and the children, and they spent the afternoon catching up. Catherine told her about the boarding house, now sold to new owners, about friends and neighbors who had wondered what became of Flora Thorne. It was strange for Faye, hearing about this life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked as the visit wound down. "Truly happy?" Faye looked at her husband, at her children playing in the street outside, at the mountain rising up beyond the town. "I am," she said simply. "This is where I belong. This is my home." Catherine hugged her tight. "Then I am happy for you. I always worried that you said yes to Thomas out of obligation, that you did not really want to go to California. Seems like fate intervened and put you where you needed to be." "It did," Faye agreed, thinking of that frozen river, of Zachariah's strong hand pulling her from the water, of the life they had built together from nothing. "Fate brought me exactly where I needed to be." They said their goodbyes, and Catherine promised to write, though both knew the letters would be rare and far between. As they rode back up the mountain that evening, Samuel in front of Zachariah on the horse, Rose and Jacob with Faye, their daughter asked a question. "Mama, were you really a different person before you met Papa?" Faye thought about how to answer. "I had a different name and a different life. But I do not think I was a different person. I think I was just waiting to become who I was always meant to be." "And who is that?" "Your mother, Papa's wife. A woman who lives on a mountain and is not afraid of hard work or cold winters or starting over when life gives her a second chance." Rose nodded, satisfied with this answer. Jacob, half asleep against his mother's chest, murmured something about dinner. And Zachariah, riding ahead with Samuel chattering about everything they had seen in town, looked back at his wife and smiled. That night, after the children were asleep, Zachariah and Faye stood outside the cabin and looked up at the stars. They had done this countless times over the years, finding peace in the ritual. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been on that ridge that day?" Zachariah asked. "If I had not seen you fall through the ice?" "Never, because I think somehow, some way, we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." He pulled her close, his arms around her waist, her back against his chest. "I love you, Faye Norton. From the moment I pulled you from that river until my last breath, I will love you. And I love you. You gave me more than a name that day. You gave me a life, a family, a home. You gave me everything." They stood there until the cold drove them inside, to the warmth of the fire and the softness of their bed and the simple joy of being together. The mountain stood watch over them, patient and eternal, guarding the family that had made their home in its shadow. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters when food was scarce and they had to make every resource stretch. There were accidents and illnesses that tested their strength and resilience. When Rose was 12, she broke her arm falling from a tree, and Zachariah had to set it himself because the trip to town would have taken too long. When Jacob was 7, he wandered off while playing and got lost in the woods for a terrifying 6 hours before Zachariah found him. But there were far more good times than bad. Summers spent swimming in the cold mountain lakes, winters gathered around the fire telling stories. The children grew strong and capable, learning to love the wilderness that was their home. Samuel proved to be a natural tracker and hunter, often accompanying his father on longer expeditions. Rose developed her mother's green thumb and expanded the garden every year, coaxing impossible bounty from the thin mountain soil. Jacob, true to his quiet nature, loved the animals and began keeping chickens and goats, trading eggs and milk in town for other goods. When Samuel was 16, a girl from Animas Forks caught his eye, and he began making excuses to go to town more often. Zachariah watched his son fall in love with a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing it meant his boy was growing up, would soon have a life of his own. "It is the way of things," Faye reminded him one night after Samuel had left for yet another trip to town. "Children grow up and find their own paths. We should be happy he has found someone who makes him smile like that. I am happy. Just not ready for it, I guess. Seems like yesterday I was teaching him to tie his boots. And soon he will be teaching his own children. That is the circle of life, my love." Samuel married his sweetheart, a practical girl named Emma, when he was 18. They built a cabin on the Norton land, close enough to help, but far enough for independence. A year later, they gave Zachariah and Faye their first grandchild, a girl they named Lily. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Zachariah understood in a new way the depth of what he and Faye had created. This was legacy. This was immortality of a sort. Their love, begun in a frozen river, would ripple forward through generations. Rose married at 19, a young man from a neighboring valley who appreciated her fierce independence and skill with growing things. They planned to homestead further south, still in the mountains, but in a place where the growing season was longer. Zachariah gave them his blessing and a substantial amount of the money he had saved over the years from his trapping and trading. "Are you sure?" Rose asked, holding the small bag of coins. "This must be everything you have put aside." "Your mother and I do not need it. We have everything that matters. Use it to build your life, to start your farm. That is what it is for." She hugged him tight. "I will miss you, Papa. We are not so far apart that you cannot visit, and we will come see you once you are settled." Jacob, at 16, showed no signs of wanting to leave. He was content with his animals and his books, happy to help his parents as they began to slow down with age. Zachariah was 50 now, Faye 46, and while they were still capable, the hard work of mountain life took more effort than it once had. "I am staying," Jacob announced one day, when Faye gently asked about his plans for the future. "If that is all right. I like it here. I do not need anything else." "Of course it is all right," Faye said, relief evident in her voice. "Though we do not expect you to stay just to take care of us." "I am not. I am staying because this is home, and I cannot imagine being anywhere else." So Jacob stayed, building his own small cabin near the main house when he turned 20, but spending most of his time with his parents. He never married, seeming content with his animals and his solitude, though he doted on his nieces and nephews when they visited. When Zachariah was 55, he took a bad fall while checking trap lines in winter. He wrenched his back severely and spent weeks unable to do much more than sit by the fire. It scared them both, the sudden reminder of mortality, of the fact that their time together was not infinite. "I do not like feeling useless," Zachariah grumbled one evening as Faye helped him to bed. "You are not useless. You are healing. There is a difference. I used to be able to work all day without getting tired. Now I throw my back out stepping wrong." "We are getting older, Zach. Both of us. That is just the truth of it." She settled beside him, taking his hand. "But we have had a good run, have we not? 27 years of marriage, 3 children, 4 grandchildren so far. A life we built exactly the way we wanted it. Still feels like it went too fast." "I know, but we still have time left. Plenty of it if we are lucky. And I intend to spend every day of it grateful for what we have." He recovered slowly, and while he never quite regained his previous strength, he adapted. He let Jacob take over more of the heavy work, focused on smaller tasks closer to home. Faye's hands began to ache in the cold from what she called her settling bones. But she still tended her garden and cooked and filled their home with warmth. They were sitting outside on a warm summer evening, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold, when Faye said, "Do you ever think about the river? The one you fell through?" "Yes. About how that one moment changed everything. If the ice had not broken, if you had not been on that ridge, if you had not decided to help a stranger, our whole lives might have been completely different. I think about it sometimes, usually to thank whatever forces in the universe put me in the right place at the right time." "Do you ever wish things had gone differently? That you had stayed alone on your mountain? That I had never complicated your life?" He looked at her, this woman who had been his companion and lover and best friend for nearly 3 decades. Her hair was gray now, her face lined, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not once. Not for a single second. You gave my life meaning, Faye. Before you, I was just existing. After you, I was living. I feel the same way. Flora Thorne was drifting, going through the motions. But Faye Norton, she has lived a full and vibrant life. She has loved and been loved, has raised children, has built something lasting, all because a mountain man pulled her from a frozen river and gave her a name. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, as they had done thousands of times before. Inside the cabin, a lamp burned steady, waiting to welcome them home. On the mountain that had been their sanctuary and their challenge, their refuge and their responsibility, Zachariah and Faye Norton had found something rare and precious. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found themselves. More years passed, each one precious, each one a gift. Samuel and Emma had 3 more children, keeping them busy with grandparenting duties whenever the young family visited. Rose and her husband built a successful farm and had 2 sons who loved coming up to the mountain to hear their grandfather's stories and learn tracking from Uncle Jacob. When Zachariah turned 60, Faye organized a celebration that brought the whole family together. They were 12 in total now, and the cabin was filled with noise and laughter and life. Zachariah looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, at his wife moving through them with grace and love, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Samuel raised a glass in toast. To my father, who taught me that strength is not just about muscles and survival, but about character and commitment. To the man who saved my mother and in doing so, gave all of us the gift of this family. To Zachariah, they all chorused, and he had to blink back tears. That night, after everyone had settled down to sleep in various corners of the cabin and the extra space Jacob had prepared in his place, Zachariah and Faye lay in their bed and listened to the sounds of their family around them. "This is what I dreamed of," Faye whispered. "When I was Flora, alone and scared and agreeing to marry a man I did not love, I used to dream of a home full of people who loved each other, a family of my own. You gave me that dream. We gave it to each other. I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. Not lost anymore. No, not lost anymore." Zachariah lived to 73, finally succumbing to pneumonia one hard winter despite Jacob and Faye's best efforts to save him. He died at home, in his own bed, surrounded by his family. His last words were to Faye, holding her hand as his strength finally failed. "Love you," he whispered. "Always." "Always," she promised, tears streaming down her face. "I will find you again. And whatever comes next, I will find you." He smiled, then closed his eyes and was gone. Faye lived another 5 years after that, cared for lovingly by Jacob, and visited often by her other children and growing brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her days tending a smaller version of her garden, telling stories, and writing in the journal she had kept all these years, chronicling the life she and Zachariah had built. On a clear spring morning, with wildflowers blooming and the river rushing full with snow melt, Faye Norton passed peacefully in her sleep. Jacob found her with a smile on her face, her journal open on the table beside her bed. The last entry, written just the day before, read, "Tomorrow I will go to my garden and plant the seeds Samuel brought me. Tomorrow I will make bread and watch for deer at the meadow's edge. Tomorrow I will live this beautiful life that started when Zachariah pulled me from a frozen river and gave me a name. But if tomorrow does not come, I will go happily, knowing I have lived fully, loved deeply, and left something good behind. I was Flora Thorne for a handful of years, but I was Faye Norton for a lifetime. and what a glorious lifetime it was. They buried her next to Zachariah on a hillside overlooking the valley, where they could watch over the land they had loved for so long. The whole family came, 3 generations strong, all of them products of a love that had begun in the most unlikely way. Samuel read from his mother's journal at the service, sharing the story of how his parents met, how his father had pulled his mother from certain death and given her not just life, but a new identity, how they had built a love so strong it rippled forward through time, creating this family, this legacy. They saved each other, he said, looking at the 2 simple wooden crosses marking his parents' graves. In every way, a person can be saved. And they showed all of us what it means to choose love, to build something lasting, to create a life worth living. The family gathered there often over the years that followed, bringing their own children and telling the story of Zachariah and Faye. The cabin remained standing, maintained by Jacob until his own death, and then by his nephew, Rose's eldest son. It became a family touchstone, a place they returned to for celebrations and memorials, for quiet reflection and connection to their roots. The story of the mountain man who pulled a woman from a frozen river and gave her a name became family legend, told and retold with each generation. Details changed slightly in the retelling, but the core remained the same. 2 people lost in different ways, finding each other in the wilderness, choosing each other every day, building something beautiful from nothing but love and determination and the courage to start over. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the light hits just right, people swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the high meadows, forever young, forever in love, forever home.